All right, good morning. Beautiful day. Sun is coming up and it's cool outside. Start to feel the change in the seasons. And God is still here, Lord of it all. We at the fellowship here, we've been meeting since 1935 when Abram Brady got 19 leaders in Seattle to come together, and we still come together on Thursday morning. The last 2 years on Zoom. Every few months we get in person somewhere at a different location. For all those years we met in the Washington Athletic Club, but since COVID we started doing Zoom, and now we're doing a sort of hybrid mix of in-person and still on the Zoom every Thursday. And we still come in the spirit of prayer and coming across human boundaries of partisan sides. We come in the aisle, as Christopher likes to say. We meet in the aisle, many different denominations, leave all that behind and just try to follow Jesus. And we've seen, especially over the summer and spring, people sharing so many things that have come out of Seattle and moved out into the world. And Alan here is one example of that. He's still here, coming from Minnesota or wherever he happens to be. And different ideas that Andy Toll shared of philanthropy, people that have gone to China, people are going to Israel. And we see God's hand in so many things. So real quick, it looks like a few people that may not have been here before. If this is your first time, you can introduce yourself, or if someone brought you here, they can introduce you and you can say hello. Give just a word about yourself, where you are, what you're doing.
I'd be glad to jump in, Bank. I have at least two faces. I think they're in the room, maybe even three. But farthest away, I think, is it Tim Koyak. Tim, are you coming in from Kentucky this morning?
Yes, I am. I am from Louisville, Kentucky. We've been up for many hours already this morning.
Yeah. Well, the Tim is another example of God's divine network. My first conversation with him was maybe just 1 or 2 months ago, and he's involved with a project called Christ at Work, which we can talk a little bit more offline. But because of Al's commitment to faith in the workplace, I wanted Tim to meet Al, at least in the Zoom room today. So I meet Tim from Louisville, Kentucky.
Good to meet him.
A little bit closer by, I see Rich Sims in the Zoom room. Rich, I met, oh my goodness, 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's right there in Seattle, guys. Okay, so I'm bringing the Seattle guys into the Zoom room from Minneapolis. So know that God's divine network is everywhere, and Rich is involved with a ministry that's just absolutely wonderful. Oh, I'm trying to remember, Reach Ministries, is that right? Mm-hmm. Right there in the heart of downtown, doing great things. You can find out more from him offline, but I think what I'm going to plan on doing is invite Rich to present to the fellowship here to share a little bit of his story. It's a wonderful story, and Rich has said he'd love to share it, so we'll tee up Rich to present sometime in the next few weeks. Paul Tomlinson, I see your face. It says Carrie's phone. Paul, you've been here before. You mentioned that you came here a few decades back, so welcome back after a decade or two of not being here. But Paul's also a Seattle business leader, been around for a long time, good friend, and knows Rich pretty well. Tim, do you know if Bernie is going to come in this morning from New York? Do you know?
He's in transit. He was going to try to, but he's in transit, so okay. No telling where he is at this point.
He said he might. This is the founder of Christ at Work. His name's Bernie Feynman. He's a wonderful man out of Louisville, Kentucky, and he was going to try and join us today. But if he does, great. If not, Tim is here to represent all that they're doing for the Lord. All right. And I think that's it that I see.
All right. Paul, and where are you, Paul?
All right. Now I'm on vacation in Sun River. Speaking quietly while everybody's asleep.
That's how I got to do it too. That's good. That's good.
But yeah, I was at the fellowship in 1975 down at the athletic club. I'm old.
All right. So, well, welcome back. We're still here.
Yeah.
All you guys are welcome back. Keep coming back, even if you're in Kentucky. And yeah, Rich, love to have you on here and sharing some stories later. And Tim and yeah, Alan started sending stuff out yesterday, day before about Christ at Work. I had not heard of it, but it definitely runs in line with I think one of Al's big passions. So this is good. This is good. Morning, Alexis. We have Centered in the house. I made sure to invite Alexis because the last time I saw her in person was at Al's last big event. So I'll just, by way of introduction, I think most of you guys who have been in Seattle know Al as founder of KIROS, but also worked at SPU school for a long time too, doing theology at work or in work and theology of business. And now it's called the business, faith in business, right, Al?
Yeah.
And
Faithful Business.
Faithful Business, Center for Faithful Business. Al filled the whole room over there in the summer and brought two guys from out of town, from Canada and England, that he met at a C.S. Lewis conference in Oxford, I believe. And they did some amazing songs and poetry live and together, and talked about collaboration and how their collaboration, when they met each other, just made things happen that neither of them had thought possible, and just astounded both of them. And they've both been doing what they do a long time. And then afterward, Al told me he had hosted the poet from Oxford, who's also a motorcycle rider and a pastor and all kinds of stuff, and teaches in Oxford. And I think the line, Al, that got me, and I said, you got to come share with us, was you had conversations during that week talking to this guy that like you'd never had in your life. Yeah. And he was a short, burly, long-haired guy, kind of reminded me of a hobbit in a way. And had his English, and the poetry was just amazing. So anyway, Al's still up to some very interesting things around Seattle, and excited to hear you share, Al. So I'll just let you take it away. And thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I wanted to walk through my story. That's what Bengt asked me to do. And I will come to the poet by the end, which was, yes, an amazing experience. The first time I was asked to tell my testimony, I wondered if I had anything to say. You see, I was raised in a Christian home. I accepted Christ as my Savior at a time I don't remember. Of course, numerous times along the way, I called on him to enter my life yet again, just to make sure it took. But I don't remember when I became a Christian. That used to bother me for a long time because I hear so many other dramatic testimonies. But then one day I was reading in John chapter 3, where Nicodemus was talking with Jesus. And Jesus said to Nicodemus, "You must be born again." And Nicodemus said, "How can someone be born when they're old? Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb and be born." Well, Jesus was drawing a parallel between physical and spiritual birth. And he went on to make that point by saying, "No one can enter the kingdom of God unless they're born of water and the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit." And in that one moment, I suddenly realized, I don't remember when I was born physically either, but I'm very much alive. It's not the remembrance of the event that is the key. It is the life that follows. And so I began a journey that God was very present with me on, to understand what it meant to walk with Christ. For a long time in my Christian life, my Christian faith was very important from a moral point of view, from a relational point of view, but it really had nothing to do with most parts of my life. I wanted to act morally, of course, but beyond that, I didn't think God really cared about mathematics, which was my area of study. But when I graduated from college, I took a job teaching 8th grade math and coaching basketball and track. I had a young man in my class who blew me out of the water. I was trying to explain to them a concept. And I know this is a horrible thing to do at 7:30 in the morning, but here is the concept. The product of two negative numbers is positive. And I don't know if you remember the first time you learned that, but I gave it my best explanation and looked around the class and all these quizzical looks on the faces of various students, except for Charles. He had a big smile on his face and his hand went up, and I said, okay, Charles, what is it? And he said, well, if 3 times 3 is 9 and -3 times -3 is 9, then the square root of 9 must be plus or minus 3 and not just 3. Is that right? And I said, wow. This kid proceeded to push me in mathematics the rest of the time he was in my class. He asked questions. He sent me to the library. I ended up creating a small study group for him and a few other boys to keep them occupied and keep them interested. And I like to say that he sent me to grad school. And so I left after 2 years and went to grad school in mathematics. When I got finished, we were living in the Midwest. I was at Iowa State University. And my wife and I decided, we had 2 young children at the time, we decided we'd like to live in someplace other than the Midwest. And so I applied for jobs on the East Coast and on the West Coast. We didn't know much about any of the areas, but I took a job in Seattle with the Boeing company, primarily because Seattle was a place where neither of us knew anyone. And we thought if we went to Southern California, I had a big network of friends. My wife did not. Maybe it would be better to come to Seattle. I wanted to go to a company because I wanted to see why anyone cared about mathematics. And there I was. We moved here in January of 1969. Our expectation was we'd be here a couple of years and then move on somewhere else. And here we still are. I settled in at the Boeing company as a math researcher. When I arrived, the Boeing company had 105,000 people. 2 years later, there were 35,000 people working at the Boeing company. The sign went up in the city, the last one out, please turn out the light. I don't know why I continued to be there, but I continued to be there, I think, because of God's hand in my life. And also because God had given me some skills in computing and mathematics, which were critical to the company at that time. In the 1970s, I was introduced to a man named Al Green. Al Green was founder of Bellevue Christian School, and he fundamentally changed my life. He introduced me to an idea that if Jesus Christ is Lord, he must be Lord of all. And that included everything that I did. He used to quote Abram Kuyper, who said, there is not 1 square inch of all of this earth where Jesus Christ does not declare, that is mine. And that meant in intellectual life and in work life and in family life. And it really did change the way I started thinking about my faith, no longer in a corner department, but also in a broader sense. And then one morning in 1981, I was riding to work and I was listening to David Maines on the Chapel of the Air, and he interviewed a man named Wayne Alderson. Wayne Alderson was vice president of a steel company. And he said, God has called me to this position, and this is my full-time Christian service in working out labor management relationships within a steel company. I was totally captivated because I'd never thought about my work at Boeing fully in that sense. After work that day, I bought a book on Wayne's life called Stronger Than Steel by R.C. Sproul. I read the book after dinner that night all the way through, finished it after midnight. The next morning I called him and he and I became friends until he died in 2014. I made arrangements to bring him to Seattle with another person named Paul Tomlinson. Paul had also read his book and was interested in what he was doing. We had a whole series of events for him for a week, and he stayed with us. We had dinner in our home. We did all sorts of things with Wayne. And it opened up the idea to me that maybe God had called me to Boeing and that this was a service to him in every way. And it began a journey that is still ongoing. What does it mean that Jesus Christ is Lord of all? What does it mean that I was in full-time Christian service while at the Boeing company? You know, you might say, well, that then opens up a new world that makes everything great. And actually, it opened up some challenges that I was unprepared for. In the mid-'80s, the Boeing company was using supercomputers to do calculations for all sorts of things in aerodynamics, and our math research group was in the lead in some of this area. Oil companies started using our computers, and there was a sales guy down in Texas who got very excited about what this could do for his revenue stream. He had us down in Texas week after week after week talking with oil companies. He became very well known because of the revenue that was coming in for him. And he was recognized by the company and went off to Stanford University for a year. And when he came back, he was to come back on a new executive assignment. His new assignment was as my boss, and his first act was to demote me. It was one of the most grueling periods of time in my life. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know whether somehow or other he was insecure or what the deal was. And I got an offer to go take a job in another city. My wife and I prayed about it. We asked the Lord, is this what you want for us? And we ultimately decided we needed to stay. And that year was the toughest year of my career. And working this out, acknowledging Jesus Christ as Lord over this, was an incredible challenge. There were some people that were standing by me. In November of that year, two things happened. They came together in a way that only God can work. The first one was that my boss's boss was fired. My boss was reassigned to another part of the company, and a whole new team of people came in. One of them was a man named Orv, who I had worked with earlier in my time at Boeing. And I called him up and I just said, I'd like to meet with you. And we had a meeting on Tuesday. On Sunday, the pastor at our church, Mark Neuenschwander, gave a sermon on Joseph. And he talked about a lot of things about Joseph, but I remember two things. Joseph had a vision for what God had called him to do, to be a great leader. You remember the dream. But he was also falsely accused and in prison. And what did he do in prison? Well, I remember two things. One of the things he did was he worked very hard. In fact, he was promoted by the jailer to be responsible for all the prisoners, and he did a great job. But the second thing is, he recognized that his situation was wrong, and he sent a message through the chief cupbearer and said, I don't belong in prison. Will you tell Pharaoh to let me out? On Tuesday, on Tuesday, I went in to see Orv. And I said, Orv, on Sunday, I was in church and I heard a sermon on the life of Joseph. And Joseph was falsely accused and in prison, but he worked really hard. And he sent a message out that he didn't belong there. I said, Orv, here are some of the things that our organization has accomplished over this last year, but I'm in prison and I don't belong there. Would you do something about it? I don't know exactly. I'm not recommending that to anyone. I don't know exactly whether that was the right thing to do. But 2 weeks later, he announced a major reorganization. It changed my life and my whole career at the Boeing company. It opened up opportunities that I'd never seen before. The only downside to that was that every time he saw me, he called me preacher, but that was fine. Orv was a great leader and a great help to me. And coming out of that experience, I was given the opportunity to create an R&D center for technology and mathematics for the company. And it was a great decade of the 90s to be able to make a difference for the company with some tools and things that we could do that it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. In the course of that, I got interviewed by the Boeing company, and they asked who was a person that really affected your life. And I mentioned Al Green and Wayne Alderson and my father, but I mentioned one other person too. I said, there's this young 8th grade student that I had who inspired my interest in mathematics, and he was a mentor to me. And if I can just say to you that a mentor can take many different forms, anyone who can have an influence on your life, and Charles was a mentor to me. That got me thinking, and I called the school and asked what had happened to him. This is many years later. I had him in class in 1962. This was in 1990. They didn't know whether he'd gone to college or not. They had no record of what he had done. And fast forward 7 years later, I was sitting here in my den, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, we have the internet now and a Mosaic browser. I wonder what would happen if I put in his name. And I put in his name, Charles Klein, and on the second page, there was an associate dean of electrical engineering at Ohio State University. I wrote him and I said, Charles, are you the one that was my 8th grade student? We had a wonderful little dialogue by email. A few years later, my wife and I were in Columbus, Ohio, and I invited him and his wife, along with my wife and I, to go to dinner together. And I thanked him for what he had done in my life, for his role in my career. His wife wasn't sure what to make of all of this, but it was a real impact on me. Our research team did some great things for Boeing, and it was really fun to be a part of it. I had some wonderful people working for me. One of them, his name was Tom Cadell. He was a guy who had in mind this idea that you could merge virtual reality with physical reality. And he said, I think we should call this augmented reality. Now, some of you have heard about augmented reality today, but if you went to Wikipedia and you looked up, you would see that was invented by a guy named Tom Cadell back in 1990. We did some really fun things for the Boeing company. It was hard work, believe me. And living that out as a Christian in leadership in a research organization was challenging, important, and I believe was the calling that God had on my life. I don't think there was anyone in the organization that didn't know I was a Christian. When people were in trouble, I had some wonderful conversations with people, encouraging them and praying for them. But I don't think it was a conflict, because I think I tried to respect who every person was in that organization. Late in the 1990s, I had a friend who came along to me and he said, I'm an ethics professor. We have been friends for a long time. I criticize technology and you build it. We're both Christians. Do we have anything to say to each other? We began a conversation that goes on to this day, starting in about 1993. In 1997, we went up to Regent College in Vancouver and taught a course. I took 2 weeks of vacation, and the course was called Business, Technology, and Christian Values. How do we bring these three things together? Basically, in the course, the two of us argued in front of a class of students from all over the world, and they loved it. We didn't agree on much, except that Jesus Christ was Lord, and that technology was a force of change that would make a difference. Out of this, we started a magazine called Ethics, where we interviewed business leaders from all over the world, looking at this question of what does it mean to think about the changes from technology, business, and the ethical environment that we find ourselves in. By 2000, it became evident that running a magazine and doing a full-time job as an R&D person was impossible. And I decided to retire from the Boeing company in 2001 and take on this ethics project full-time, part-time, I would say, because I also had always wanted to teach at a university, and I took a position at Seattle Pacific. My new life was going to be ethics magazine, teaching at Seattle Pacific University, and playing a bit of golf. Well, God blessed me with a bad golf game, and that part didn't develop as much as I had thought. But I did make a commitment to God that anything at the intersection of business, faith, technology, and ethics would be something I would consider. And I tend to have a bias toward yes. And so a lot of opportunities began to open up. In 2001, right after I'd retired, I met Jeff Rogers at Tully's, and he said, we're interested in starting a group on business and faith. And KIROS was born out of that experience, and I've been involved on the board of KIROS ever since. In 2005, I got a letter from some people I didn't know in Boston, and they said, we're interested in asking the question, what does the Bible have to say about our daily work? We knew, of course, that there were some instructions in the scripture related to our daily work, but they said, we want to do something more ambitious. We'd like to write a commentary on all of the Bible and what it has to say about daily work. That project began in 2006. It continues to this day. We produced in 2014 a first draft of a commentary, which is available online, theologyofwork.org, and you can click on any book of the Bible. Matthew, you would expect to find some things, Genesis, Colossians, but what about Song of Solomon, or Ruth, or the book of Revelation, or 1 John or 2 John? And yes, every book of the Bible has something to say about our daily work. Then my friend from California, who had started ethics with me, got a teaching assignment at Gordon Conwell Seminary, and he asked me if I would co-teach with him over a period of about 6 years. And we did several cohorts in workplace theology, ethics, and leadership. I got involved in organizing some faith at work summits. I did some work in the Central African Republic on economic development, and more recently in Mongolia on ethics and the government and corruption and business and what that looks like. I've been involved in writing some books. I ultimately wrote up the story of Joseph from the lens of his business career, called it The Accidental Executive. Got involved with a former leader at the Service Master company, Bill Pollard. And one day he called me and he said, I think there needs to be a book on the history of the Service Master company, and I think you need to write it. And I said, well, I'm not sure about that, but I'd be glad to help you find someone. Ultimately, I told him he had stolen real estate in my brain as I got really interested in the Service Master story. And after 3 years of research, I did come out with a book on the Service Master company. I'm working on a couple of others now. Walking with Christ in the 21st century. What can we learn in our polarized, difficult world about walking with Christ from the lives of people who have gone before, from biblical characters? So we are looking at Abraham and Joseph and Esther and Ruth and Daniel and Job and Moses and Peter and Paul. How did they navigate culture? and how did they represent the God who they served in a way that demonstrated respect to others, that brought value to others, and that lived out the life for God. I'd like to mention a couple of other things. In 2016, a pastor from Kansas City who's been very influential in the faith and work movement, Pastor Tom, he wrote a book called Work Matters, and he was coming to town, and he said, and a friend said to me, why don't we get a few people together to hear from Tom? And we ultimately decided to reach out to any organization that did anything related to faith and work. We found 28 organizations in the Seattle area doing something at the time. We made an offer to every one of them that if you bring a table of people to this event, we will write about your organization in a program so that everyone can know what you are doing. We ended up having 250 people at SPU in 2016 for this event, and it was really fun. Out of that, we birthed an organization called Common Good Seattle. How can each of these organizations come together, not as one organization? Each has their own role to play, whether it's Centered or KIROS or the Fellowship or C3 Leaders or SPU, it doesn't matter. How do we bring them together once a year and just pray for each other and to see what God is doing in our city? And how can we together be together around what God is doing in our city? And then in 2021, we began this idea of, well, there's a poet and a songwriter who are coming to Regent College. Why don't we bring them to Seattle and put on some events? And I'm in a small group with 3 other guys, and the 4 of us plotted bringing these 2 guys to Seattle. I took on 2 of the assignments. One was, can we bring the faith and work community together to hear from a poet and a songwriter? For many people, that was a stretch, but they came, I think in part because they wanted to get their organization listed in this program. And in June 7, we had a great event at SPU. These guys were magnificent in what they did. And I'd love to tell you a little more about the event, but on the Monday, the 6th of June, we brought the Christians in Tech together. And we did that at Westminster Chapel, and the same poet and songwriter talked with them about what it is to collaborate together and to be one before others, representing Christ in our world. I have a recording of that event, which I would be glad to send to any of you that would like to see it. As Malcolm Geit gives a poem and Steve Bell turns it into a song, and they collaborate, and the way they did this was incredible. That evening, not only did they give that teaching, but in the very middle of the event, we had a panel discussion among representatives from Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft talking about what it is to be a Christian in tech. And then the poet and songwriter came back and did a response to what they had heard. And it was an amazing event. I guess to sum up my life, it would be that what Jesus said in John 17, I'd like to read that to you because I think it centers on what my passion is for the city and for our world today. Jesus said, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe through their message." That's us. We have believed because of the message of Jesus' disciples, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. Did you get the power of that message? Jesus said that the oneness that is demonstrated by his people is the witness to the world that Jesus is who he says he is. If we look at the church that is so polarized and divided with the rest of culture around cultural issues, we have to say, what is it that we can do to be a part of demonstrating the oneness of the body of Christ as a witness to the world? I and them, you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. That is the passion of my life, that Jesus Christ is Lord of all areas of life, and that the call to oneness is a witness to the world. And I'm thankful for the fellowship, for their part in this, and to each of the organizations in our city that we can partner together to make a difference for Jesus Christ where he has placed us. You see, we don't wish for being back in the 1950s. It wasn't so great for some of our Black brothers at that time anyway. But God has placed us on assignment in the 21st century, and let's live that out. Thanks for listening.
Right. Thank you, Al. Thank you. So at this time, especially you guys who are new, we have a discussion, question, answer. You can make a comment to Al or ask him a question. Anything you want.
Alan here from 2,000 miles away. I remember your big event that you put together in 2016 up at SBU with 250 folks. I mean, some of us in the room here were there. I think Ben and Chris and Garrick and Jim, a few other guys in there were at the fellowship table that day. And that was just absolutely fabulous. My question is, now that we're 6 years down the road from that, the organizations that were represented, I don't know, there were several. Have you seen a growth in collaboration, and what have you seen changed since 2016, the gathering of what was probably one of the biggest events ever of the Faith at Work community? And I just be curious of what things of what the Lord has done with that since 2016.
Yeah, so we have met as a community. We had some people that formally have joined something called Common Good Seattle. All that's required is that you are a part of a common calendar. And so that we post events on a common calendar. If you went to commongoodseattle.org, you would see a calendar. And on that calendar are events from C3 leaders, from KIROS, from Centered, from Urban Impact, and others, so that we can just let the other communities know. At KIROS, we've made the commitment that at every meeting, we bring up the Common Good calendar and let people know of other events that are taking place in the city. So that's one thing that's happened. COVID put us behind the 8 ball a bit because we weren't able to meet, but we did gather to form this event in June 7th, 2022. With the poet, and we intend to meet again at a rhythm about twice a year to try and have these organizations just be supportive of each other. Not everyone has become a part of this formally, but there are 10 organizations that are formally a part of this, and we invite any others who have an interest to be a part of this. To say we're not trying to create one organization, we're simply trying to create a spirit of collaboration. And I believe that some of that spirit is starting to happen. And I'm excited for what that could do in the city of Seattle.
Yep, we had a table there, Alan. I was there and sitting with Alexis there, and it was a lot of the folks he talked with. Steve Burry was there, and Mason Rutledge, and it was a full room. You had a few, I don't know, over 200, but close maybe.
Yeah. So Al, I just had a conversation with another friend that most of us in this room know, and he was on fire 2, 3, 4 days ago with enthusiasm because he had just returned from the Washington weekend, with Centered. And I see Alexis is here. So example, would that be an example of a recap of everything that took place at the Washington weekend just a week ago? Would a person go to Centered, or would they find that in Common Good Seattle after the fact or just before the fact?
So this is a logistical thing. Every organization has the opportunity to post this before the fact whenever they have the information. I find that it takes a little bit of prompting to get people to post things. So I'm not sure if that event was posted on the calendar or not. Steve Burry just sent me a note of something coming up in October that will be posted on the calendar so that Urban Impacts can be there. So every organization is invited to do it before the fact. And then a couple of times a year that leaders from the organizations will come together and we'll just pray for each other and see what God is doing in our lives. Wanted to make this a light lift, not a heavy lift, but we want to have the spirit of cooperation within the city.
Oh, you really touched on the key point of Christian witness, of our being one together in Christ. And those are easy words to say and not necessarily hard to live out. But what is the difference you've seen in the field of technology in terms of Christians bearing that kind of witness? And I'm thinking along the line of what difference does it make to technology itself when people live together out of that spirit of Christ together?
Okay. Two things I would add to that. I would say to that. One is the technology companies, maybe more than others, have recognized that they want people to bring their whole self to work. And so within Apple, Google, Amazon, etc., there is what is called the Amazon Christian Fellowship, which has about 1,000 people in it. There is the Apple Christian Fellowship, the Google Christian Fellowship. These people gather on a regular basis within their own companies and talk about what it is, in what way they can be an influence in the work of their company. One young man who I work with pretty regularly is in the Facebook Christian Fellowship, and he gets all the time from Christians, how can you be a Christian and work at Facebook? And his response is, would you rather there are no Christians at Facebook? He wants to be an influence in any way that he can for the kingdom of God within Facebook. And that means around policies, it means around practices, it means around encouraging others to be able to be respectful in the way that they conduct themselves and be a witness for Christ within that community. Then there's a group of people that I meet with on Mondays, one Monday a month, which are Christians in artificial intelligence. And these are from very different companies. And they gather together to ask, in what way do we as Christians think about the changes that are happening in the world of metaverse and artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of these things? What does it mean to be a Christian in that environment, and to raise questions about what this technology could do? And so there's a lot of activity within the tech world among Christians who are very serious about their faith and very serious about representing Christ in the world where God has given them an assignment.
And can you give some examples of how you've seen them actually do that?
Yes. So raising a question, you're going to do this policy, but thinking as a Christian, you recognize this policy could have some downsides to it. It could have some negative impact on people and the way things are done. Can you speak up to that? You're not in power, but can you raise this question? What would happen if this took place? How would this affect our company? And these people are speaking up in these areas. I can't give you a lot of the specific results that have come from this, but I can tell you that some of the emergence of machine learning, for example, is influenced by Christians who say, if you do that, this would happen. Well, then we better mitigate against that happening. And so even having that voice raised is a really important part of the development of every one of these companies. And gathering Christians together for the purpose of encouraging each other in this work is a vital thing that Amazon Christian Fellowship, Google Christian Fellowship, Apple Christian Fellowship, that's what these groups do. And it's a really important thing.
Mitch is coming to us from another world.
Yeah, with no face color. This is fabulous this morning. Al, I was struck on several points of your talk this morning, particularly towards the end, when you referenced your life as if I have to summarize my life. What a remarkable opening line. What I want to ask you, in the amount of discipleship and stewardship that you have brought to your career and your personal life and the organizations that you are a member of, how often are you speaking to non-believers and stretching the community into those who don't understand or refuse to have the awareness of another way of thinking of life through the course of a Christian set of values?
That's a great question. And I look for those opportunities and I share in those opportunities as I can. I'll give you one example. This was back in 2006. I was invited to give a talk to the business school about organizational culture at the International Islamic University in Kuala Lumpur. It was an amazing event. I talked to them about 8 traits of a healthy culture, and that started with humility and ended with courage. And at the end, I told them that this is from a seminar that Jesus did. It's recorded in Matthew chapter 5, and it is representing the Beatitudes. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, and that is humility. And the last one, blessed are those who are persecuted. That's courage, calling for courage. And so this idea of being able to walk through that with some people at the Islamic University, was able to carry on that conversation for a long time with a number of the people that were there. But I frequently get involved in speaking about issues of things like corporate culture or leadership with non-Christian groups. And invariably, I can draw on something from the scripture. Leadership principles from the 10 Commandments, for example. Here's 10 leadership principles, and talking to them and then telling them where it comes from and what it means and why that's important. So the whole idea would be to raise the question of God. That's what Service Master was so well known for. Bill Pollard said, I loved as a CEO of a publicly traded company to raise the question of God amongst the various constituents inside and outside the company. And that's a passion as well. And I do get that opportunity. And I try and, like I say, have a bias toward yes. And when an opportunity like that comes along, I will certainly take it.
Appreciate your answer. On a personal note, when you were a regent, were you working with Rod?
With who?
Who was president of Region 8 during your time?
Oh, Walter Wright was at first, and now Jeff Greenman is the president. This is Regent College in Vancouver.
Correct.
British Columbia. Yeah.
Okay.
And I've continued to work with their program there. They have a leadership program, and I'm a mentor with one of their, I've been a mentor in this program for about 6 years.
It's a great school.
And Paul Stevens, who did a lot of the early work in Faith and Work at Regent, is a close friend, and he was down here with us for a weekend in May. So yeah, I continue to interact with those people. They're doing some really good work.
Good to know. Thanks.
Al, tell us about you and Nancy, and through all of this journey, and through that incredulous year at Boeing. How has that been going, and how does she put up with all of the activity and situations going on? But so much fruit has come out of that. You want to share a bit on that, because that's really part of your story, your witness.
We've been a partner in this for a long, long time. In fact, it turns out that while I'm doing this with you, I was hoping the broadband would hold up here. Our internet would hold up, because she's doing a Zoom call with a group of women, and she leads a Bible study every week for women in the workplace, and she's going through the scripture with them. So we are partners in this activity. We met at the student newspaper in college. The reason that I taught for 2 years was that she had 1 year to go in school, and so we got married after I graduated, but she had 1 year to go. So I had to get a job near DeKalb, Illinois. And that's why I ended up in that teaching position. A couple weeks ago, Nancy and I celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. And it was an amazing time. We happened to be in Sweden at the time, and celebrating with my brother. We have been partners in this for a long time. We've been through some highs and some lows, some great challenges, some great joys and opportunities. And none of this would be possible without her. And yes, occasionally she rolls her eyes when I tell of another great opportunity that could happen. But I'm incredibly grateful for her. And I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and grateful for every one of these family members. Thanks for asking that.
Hey, Al, Jim here. A question for you. First of all, let me prompt Bent. I'm looking at the Common Good Seattle website, and I see that we're not, the Fellowship Seattle is not listed as a partner, so we need to get on that page. So Bent.
I've been talking with him about it. We're working it.
Okay.
We were in their meetings and everything. Yep.
All righty. All right. Well, I'll just leave it to you two. It's
Okay.
in really good hands. The question I have for you is, so Common Good Seattle is, I'm going to use the word, a parachurch organization. I think well, just looking at it, there's not an Episcopal or Lutheran or churches listed here, right, even though each one of the groups mentioned here as partners will, are people of faith, and they attend a specific worship spot. My question to you is there a move afoot with the group to bring more commonality into the church setting, where churches share calendars with things that are going on? Some of the smaller churches can't afford to have, if you would, let's say a men's ministry, because they only have 50 people in the congregation, and so maybe they want to join something else. Is there an outreach from Common Good into the church community?
Now that's a heavy lift, Jim.
Yes,
that's a heavy lift.
Yes. So let me tell you the extent to which that is true. Common Good Seattle is trying to keep its focus on thinking about this connection between work and faith, daily life and our faith. In my experience over the years, most churches don't actually do much with that. They are really great at dealing with personal relationship with Christ. They're great at dealing with families. but they don't do much to recognize the call of God in the lives of their people in the work that they do every day. That has been a passion of mine for many, many years. I'm working with quite a number of churches here. And through the Theology of Work Project, we actually have a project to engage churches to better equip their people for their daily work. And our goal would be, is there some way that we could do this in Seattle? So I have been working with any churches that are interested in trying to address this part of the message of our faith, which is very real in Scripture and very silent in most of our churches. And I think making some progress there could lead to something like what you've outlined, Jim. But the idea of becoming a church resource is really beyond the scope of what Common Good Seattle is trying to do at this point.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, Al, I'm just curious. Maybe you can give us one story, one nugget about the poet you brought over from England, who himself talked about being a bridge, like he was brought in to present to, he's Anglican or Episcopalian, and different sides. Of course, they have all different range of culture and politics inside their church. And I don't know, what were some things that, or one thing that struck you when he was here?
Okay, so Malcolm stayed with us for 4 days, and it was an incredible experience. I've never met anyone like him. He is a poet. He's a professor at Cambridge University. He was a professor. He's retired now. He was an Anglican priest. He's a motorcycle rider. He plays a mean guitar, and he looks like a hobbit. I've never seen anyone quite like this. Steve Bell, in the event that we had for the tech group, called him a magical creature, and that he was. So one morning we were out for a walk, and he said to me, I really understand the purpose, the way that purpose can play into the life of a person who's leading a business owner, or a tech person, or a doctor, or someone professionally. But how does it play into the laborer? How does it affect the way of an ordinary person who has what they might consider a menial job? How does it play into their lives? And I said, well, let me tell you about what I learned from the Service Master story. Every person has a role to play. At Service Master, they used to say to the janitors cleaning the floors in the hospital, your job is not just to clean the floor, but to help the patient get well. Here's the link between what you do and a bigger purpose. And he paused and he said, I actually wrote a poem about something like that. And I said, well, what is that? And he pulled out up on his phone, and he talked about, he had written a poem on where was Jesus on Easter Sunday during COVID when all the churches were closed. And his poem went to the point that Jesus was with the hospital workers and the nurses and the janitors at the hospital, with the frontline workers who were working in stocking grocery store shelves. Here is Jesus on Easter Sunday out in the marketplace. And I said, Malcolm, you have to read that on Tuesday night. And so that was one of the poems that he read that evening. But it's an illustration of how he can think about in a language that I don't have. And so I so greatly admire him. In a poetic language about an ordinary thing that gives new life to this thing. The event that we had with the tech group, he and Steve Bell together explained collaboration by showing how they built a song together based on a poem and based on their interaction. And then they said to the tech community, you don't build anything on your own. You're a part of a team. How do you work as a team member to make this thing work? And it was a beautiful thing. And I think had a true impact on the tech community. And if you like, Bengt, I don't have it right in front of me, but I'd be glad to share the link to the recording that we did for the tech community. And I can even point to several subsets of that hour-and-a-half presentation that highlight some of these areas of collaboration. So I would be glad to send that to you, and you can share that with the group.
That'd be great. We can post it or even send it out in one of Jim's missives.
Yeah.
Al, thank you so much for all that you brought to us this morning. I find that whether it's 5 minutes chatting with you after KIROS or a full hour like this, there's just so much that flows forth from the Lord through you. And so thank you for being faithful and for sharing. I have a son who is 23, and he has his own business, and he's in a place where he's looking to expand his horizons. And what advice would you give to him? He's asked me to set up some meetings with folks to, some business people, and you're on my list of people that I would like to have him sit down with. But what advice would you give to a young person who's very smart, very focused, but he feels like he's kind of siloed?
Yeah, I would start by asking the question, what is the purpose of what your business expansion would be? Is it about money, or is it about something bigger than that? Are you accomplishing something that is really important for the world? And, we tend to downplay the little things and upplay the big things. It doesn't have to be a big thing. How do you view the employees of the business? Are they tools to get your work done? Or are they people made in the image of God and of great value? How do you create an understanding of the role of the people? Service Master had as its first two objectives to honor God in all we do and to help people develop. Profitability and excellence of programming and all that were a part of what they did, but they weren't primary. The primary was to honor God, big purpose, and to help people develop. That's where I would start.
So, for him, it's more that he actually is at that place where he's trying to find purpose for himself, I guess, and direction. So it's not less about him trying to grow his business. It's more in terms of him trying to grow himself. And
right.
So what would be a good starting point?
Yeah, so seeing purpose, there's a story from the Middle Ages about two people doing the same job. They were both hauling bricks, building a cathedral. And one of them said, I hate my job. All I do all day is move bricks, and it's hot and it's tired and it's dirty work. The other person said, I love my job. I'm building a cathedral. It's a question of what is the orientation to what you're doing and why are you doing it? And starting with the why is a really important element of this.
Thank you.
Rich, Tim, any thoughts? We're going to wrap up and close in some prayer in a couple minutes, but you guys are free to say anything if you want.
No, it was fascinating. It's directly in line with what we've been doing over the past year with Christ at Work. We've started an initiative where we're going in and meeting people, companies of all sizes who have intentionally brought care and compassion into the workplace and done it in the name of Christ and just seeing their culture change as a result. Really going from being a Sunday God, or even a man who leads his family well, but somebody who opens up 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, to the availability of God to work through him and in him to his people. I mean, what's your purpose? Are your associates a tool to get work done or an opportunity to develop people? That's the heartbeat of what we're trying to really capture. So thanks for letting me be a part of this.
That's great, Tim.
Awesome. Hey, have Al get your email to us, and we'll get you on our list and mail out an email every week.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
It'd be fun to have a side conversation, Tim. I've looked at your website. I love what you're doing, and so
yeah, let's connect. Let's definitely connect.
I just love what Al is doing. It's just in the workplace. I deal with a lot of young adults that are getting in corporate world, and as they get closer to God, they feel like they should drop everything and go into full-time ministry. But just letting you know, full-time ministry is at your work, and not necessarily coming down to the temperature, but being the thermostat to change the temperature, because there's so much fear and anxiety and doubt, and being a conduit of hope, it just changes the whole atmosphere in there. And I love the workplace ministry, just going in and being that light, and not having those things holding you down that will change the whole atmosphere and everyone around you. And there's definitely people that have questions about God and about their future and about where they're going. And that's why we need to be placed there. So I really love what Al has set up a path to do, and to refocus. And I do think the churches, as far as discipling people, how their work is important and where they've been placed as a sphere of influence is so important right now. And like I say, I have a lot of people like, I need to quit my job and do everything to go out into ministry. It's like, as a Christian, you are in 24 ministry with friends, coworkers, community, strangers, orphans, and widows at the gate. We have an opportunity all day long, all the time. Yeah.
Good word, Rich.
That's awesome. That's awesome.